Turning to John chapter 4, 23 and 24, Jesus introduces the idea of worshipers. He introduces a number of things, but he certainly has brought to our attention that we may worship him. The hour cometh, and now is, said the Lord, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for such doth the Father seek to be his worshipers. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. This means that worshipers are privileged. They are privileged to be allowed to worship. They are privileged to be invited to worship. They are privileged to benefit from worship. And so we're going to read the idea that we are commanded to worship God. That's the subject or the title of our lesson. Commanded to worship God. Yet, in this command, there is great blessing and benefit and profit for those who would be the true worshipers of God. Let us take notice of something out of Psalm 73:13. It will be a major part of what we have to say concerning worshipers because David wrote a book of devotion, and it's called the Book of Psalms. In Psalm 73, verse 13, and then in verse 16, we have these truths. Surely in vain have I cleansed my heart. David just said, it is useless for me to be a child of God forgiven of my sins. Verse 16, when I thought how I might know this, it was too painful for me. Verse 17, time frame, change occurs until I went into the sanctuary of God and considered. It is always good to go into worship and to consider what is important. And that's what David did. The Psalm 73 is a magnificent psalm concerning David looking around and recognizing that those around him who were wicked, ungodly men prospered in life, and he didn't. He hurt. It bothered him. He almost stumbled. We'll see that. But then he entered into worship, the sanctuary of God. David, while he was there, compared the deeper thoughts of life with the shallow thinking of the wicked. Here is the comparison as he saw it. Everything looked good for the ungodly since they seemed to prosper using their evil to get ahead in life. Yet, when a more thoughtful and thorough approach guided his conclusion and his thought process, he saw the finale of the wicked, and it was not good. What caused David to form a different view concerning the realities of life, concerning serving God? Here's the answer: worship. Worship. And so worship is vitally important. We're going to take notice of some things that will help us to understand why God would command us to worship. We've taken notice of them many times before. But the first thing we want to see is this. We need to emphasize the good of worship. We need to emphasize the good for being a worshiper. We must focus on who we are. Who are you, in other words? If we can figure out who we are, then we're so far ahead in the area of worship. But you have to include that you are a child of God. If you determine that your ancestors were formed from a rock millions of ages ago, then you cannot be anything more than a modified rock. And your neighbor is indeed a rockhead. However, don't be so hard-headed. You did not come from a rock. Acts chapter 17, verse 29, the Apostle Paul would talk to those who were extremely wise and scientists of his day, and he would say this, being then the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by the art and device of men. We ought not to think that God is a stone. Wait a minute. We are the offspring of God. If God is not a stone, we're not a stone, folks. Simply because the scientific world guesses, assumes, jumps at all sorts of conclusions that in which they have no evidence, doesn't mean that you came from a primordial soup or a stone that happened to explode from a little bitty pinhead. Oh, I know they're changing their mind on those things. Yet at the same time, they will remind you, we don't know. And they don't. But God has told us we are the offspring of God. Do you know how important it is to worship the gods, to worship the idols in the form of birds, bugs, beasts, and human beings? Destroys man's view of himself. Whatever God you serve, that is who you will conclude you are. If you serve a bug, then you'll think that's you're just a bug, and those around you are bugs. And what did you do with bugs? Worshiping the God of heaven can adjust the way we view ourselves. It aids us. Worshiping God can adjust the way we view ourselves. That's the point of worship, folks. It aids us by elevating our perspective above the realm of what we are being told by the unknowing ones. Before we get to the unknowing one, listen to a fellow by the name of Donald Whitney. He says, the more we focus on God, the more we understand and appreciate how worthy He is. Let me quickly add this point, because it's the main point of what we're talking about. Worshiping God not only helps us to appreciate God and to see His work, it helps us to appreciate ourselves and to recognize our own worth in the eyes of God. We're not beasts of the field. In Psalm 100, verse 3 and 4, David said this, know ye that Jehovah, He is God. It is He that hath made us. We are His. We are His people. Verse 4, enter into His gates with thanksgiving, into His courts with praise. Give thanks unto Him. Why? Because He needs it? No, because we needs it. We need to appreciate who we are. Who are we? In Psalm 122, verse 1, David would ring out and say, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Why? Why was he full of cheer? Why was his day brightened? Why was he glad? Because it is good, it is beneficial, and it is profitable, something that we will see more so in just a moment. However, let's contrast something we heard from Bill Gates, an unknowing one, with what we just heard from Mr. Donald. In 1996, agnostic, it means he doesn't necessarily believe in anything, agnostic Bill Gates said this, just in terms of allocation of time resources, religion is not very efficient. There's a lot more I could be doing on Sunday morning. Mr. Bill Gates, 100 years from now, what will you be doing on Sunday morning? Similarly to what we just heard from Bill Gates, a supposed Christian lady expressed the way a number of Christians feel about worship. Here's what she said. I have approached worship before not as a delight that God calls me to, but as a draining duty that I need to perform to somehow stroke the ego of an all-powerful God who created me for that purpose. Before we get to who created me for that purpose, let me call to mind that motherhood is a duty, yet the majority of mothers consider it a delight. Now we want to address the idea that it is a draining duty and that it is God created me so that I could help His ego. Let me ask you, little writer, at the beginning, when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden enjoying the delights and comforts of life, before they ignorantly, conveniently turned their back on God and sinned, did you know there were no priests to help you worship? Did you know there was no animal sacrifices in worship? Did you know there were no 5 acts of worship to stroke His ego? Instead, the Bible tells us that the Lord walked with man in the cool of the evening. Does that sound like he needs his ego stroked? However, things change because man forgot God as being God. The more we focus on God, the more we understand and appreciate how worthy we are as his creation. But a second point that we need to understand in the area of worship, especially today, is this. Today in Christian worship, we too draw nigh unto God. Even as David wrote long ago in Psalm 73, verse 28, he said, "But it is good for me to draw near unto God. I have made the Lord Jehovah my refuge, that I may tell of all thy works." What do you do in worship? You tell men of all of his wonderful works. You see, he's got an ego. No, folks. You tell others of his wonderful works because they think he's a bug. They think he's the imagination of men. They think he's wicked. They have no idea who he is. So you tell men so that they can appreciate who they are as we continue the thought of drawing near unto God. In John 4:24, you may remember that John would write and say that Jesus said that he seeks true worshipers that will worship him in spirit and in truth. An internet writer puts forth two major flaws concerning God and Christian worship. I've heard it for decades. I remember as a young preacher, as a young man, before we even obeyed the gospel, as far as that goes. That goes back a long, long time ago. See, right now I'm thinking that goes back even before Wanda was born. That's quite a while back. This interesting internet writer puts forth two flaws contained in this quote. See if you can figure out what these two flaws are. It's out of Matthew 18:20. "We experience," said the writer, "the unique presence of Jesus. According to Matthew 18:20, where I am, where you are, there I am in the midst of you," he says. Jesus shows up in a mysterious way. Conflict resolution is the context of this passage, but I believe we can apply it to attending worship as well. When two or three are gathered together for worship, Christ comes and resides in our midst. So what are the flaws? Flaw number one is this. You can apply it to worship as well as conflict resolution. No, you can't. No, you can't. Here's why. Problem number two. He thinks that there's some sort of mysterious entry of Christ in the midst of us when two or three are gathered together to worship, when two or three are gathered together to carry out some sort of disciplinary action against a sinful brother. He's wrong. He's wrong in the context, and you can't switch it and expand it in order to conflict resolution. Pardon me. You can't expand it to worship. It's talking about where a brother has committed sin. And two or three are gathered together in his name, according to his authority, in his name. I'm there with you, meaning I'm in agreement with what you're doing. When you're doing something godly, even to the point of withdrawing fellowship and carrying on discipline, the Lord agrees with that. And that's the point of the passage. It is not saying that God is physically present because of Matthew 18:20. No, the Lord is present, that's true, but it's not mysterious, it's spiritual. True worship is an encounter with the Holy God, and his nearness is man's gain. We turn to a great deal of importance concerning worship in the area of the benefit of worship, the profit of worship. However, before we even get into that, I need to be sure and emphasize that not all Christian worship is beneficial. Not all Christian worship is beneficial, because whenever you engage in a false worship, when you engage in a will worship and you're a Christian and you're doing it in the name of Christ, you can't do it in the name of Christ when it's false. There's no benefit. Here's what Paul wrote in Colossians 2:16. Which things indeed have a show of wisdom and will worship. Will worship is self-chosen worship. You didn't get your acts of worship from God. You came up with them on your own. Now listen as he describes the kind. Which things indeed have a show of wisdom and will worship and humility and severity of the body, but are not of any value against the indulgence of the flesh. Not any value. There's no benefit. It doesn't help you. The implication is that Christianity and true worship does have benefit. So it's not simply worshiping God that benefits, but there's a special benefit for those who worship God in the way that God has commanded. When studying the benefits of worship, students ought to listen to David. We're back to Psalm 73 because it has a great message. So we're going to deal more closely, in a close way, with the text. I'm starting in verse 2 of Psalm 73. But as for me, said David, my feet were almost gone. My steps had well nigh slipped. He was losing his spirituality. He was losing his spiritual fervor. He was in danger of losing his soul. That's what he means. I was envious, verse 3, at the arrogant. When I saw the prosperity of the wicked, there were no pains in their death. Their strength is firm. They are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. They don't have any problems. Their eyes stand out with fatness, prosperity, bountifulness. They have more than heart could wish for. There's a great deal of satisfaction. There's a great deal of contentment in the world of the wicked because they prosper. They're doing well. Verse 13. Surely in vain have I cleansed my heart. Why am I not wicked? Surely in vain have I cleansed my heart and washed my hands in innocency, for all the day long I have been plagued. I have been chastened every morning. When I thought how I might know this, it was too painful for me. Until I went into the sanctuary of God and considered their latter end. Surely thou didst set them in slippery places. Thou castest them down to destruction. How are they become desolate? In a moment, they are utterly consumed with terrors. So David says, when it comes time to the moment of death, things change. Things change. And when I think of the moment of death, I've told you this story many a time because it struck me when it happened. Sue and I were but little bitty babies, and we had two little bitty babies, maybe three at that time. And Sue was in the hospital. And just down the way, about 2 rooms, there was a gentleman that knew he was dying. You've never heard such mournful, woeful crying to God. He knew he was lost. And he wept sorely. The terror of being consumed by God. The last thing we look at is we're going to take a closer look at 2 acts of Christian worship, not all 5 of them, but 2 acts. And we're going to see how they profit the worshiper, how they benefit the worshiper. In 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, we have the command to give. And giving benefits man. It not only benefits other men, but it also benefits the man that is giving. As Jesus said, and we'll be reminded of it, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Since God already owns what you have and what you give, how does it benefit him? It doesn't. Since God lives in the spiritual realm, what good is the physical things of this life, of this world? Nada. Since God has everything he needs, how does it benefit him? It doesn't. That's why Acts 20:35. It is more blessed to give than to receive, and we are the givers. In 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, and in 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 11, especially 2 Corinthians 9:6. But this I say, he that soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly. He that soweth bountifully shall also reap bountifully. Let each man do according as he hath purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound unto you, that you may always have all sufficiency in everything, and may abound unto every good work. And he that supplieth seed to the sower and bread for food shall supply and multiply your seed for sowing, and increase the fruits of your righteousness. You will be blessed, ye being enriched in everything and all liberality, which worketh through us on thanksgiving unto God. How's he going to do that? It doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us that every individual child of God is going to be rich and prosperous. It does leave this thought in mind. We will be rich and prosperous spiritually when we give. It is more blessed to give than to receive. It's saying the same thing. Going back a number of decades ago, centuries ago, to 1315 to 1317 in Europe, a famine hit Europe. And there's one well-documented historical narrative that reflects the principle of sowing bountifully and reaping bountifully, sowing bountifully and reaping bountifully. It seems like the farmers in Europe varied in their response to the famine that came and was upon their crops. Some cautiously, due to the prior poor harvest, sowed sparingly to conserve seed, resulting in a meager yield that barely sustained their own household, much less something left over. Others invested heavily in the sowing and hired laborers to maintain fields despite the odds, reaping relatively better. In 1316, when conditions briefly improved, the court rolls of Wilsham contrasted the two ideas. The court would say one entry goes like this from 1316. John hath sown his land well, hired men for the task, yielding a good fruit this year. Contrast with William. William, quote unquote, for lack of seed and labor, hath a poor harvest. You sow bountifully, you reap bountifully. And that's what exactly happened in that century, in that famine. Paul insists that no man was ever the loser because he was generous. The second command that we have is the command to sing. It also benefits man, not God. Here's what I mean. True worship, as Joshua Hill would say, true worship is more than singing in church. He said, I strongly believe that worship is one of the most important aspects of our Christian life. As a result, Satan has targeted it directly, profusely, and without ceasing. And because of this, it is vital to understand what it really means to worship and why worship is more than just singing in church. The reason for singing is basically twofold. Here's the first one, James 5:13. Is any among you suffering? Let him pray. Is any cheerful? Let him sing praise. When you are suffering and you pray to God, who benefits? Well, you do, not God. Furthermore, when you are cheerful and you praise God, who benefits from that? You do. Now we turn to Hebrews chapter 2, and it's quoting from Psalm 22. And it says this concerning the Messiah: I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the assembly, I will praise thee. So here we have the writer telling us that he's going to declare the name of God. So worship is exalting God. Worship is declaring and proclaiming God. Let me go now to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19 and 20, and we see again really a combination of those two. speaking one to another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your hearts unto the Lord, giving thanks always for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, even the Father. So here he would say, we're speaking one to another. And as we speak one to another, therefore we are admonishing one another, we are teaching one another, we are helping one another. That's singing. It benefits us. But we are telling others about God and we are honoring him. So we are able to honor God in worship, in our song, and we're able to help ourselves, edification, building up, getting stronger, and being able to do heaven's will. One of the songs I remember Sister Jackson at Fort Cobb. You remember her? She was a young lady that was an elder's wife, and she had messed up her hip, and she hurt morning, noon, and night. When we would sing, Count Your Many Blessings, she would come out and say, we should not be singing that song. What she saw was a poor mouthing from the song. When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, you're not tempest tossed, you got it pretty good, she would say. When you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, why are you discouraged? You're not lost. You may think all is lost, but you're not lost. Count your many blessings, name them one by one. It will surprise you what the Lord hath done. If we count our blessings, it's helpful. Are you ever burdened with a load of care? Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? Count your many blessings. Every doubt will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. When you look at others with their lands in gold, David, Psalm 73. Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? It did to him. Count your many blessings, every doubt, count your many blessings. Money cannot buy your reward in heaven, nor your home on high. So, amid the conflict, whether great or small, be not discouraged. God is over all.